the OGP, when they set their policy, they've developed a suite of government construction contracts. The government construction contracts, they're mandatory to use on all public works contracts. There are various derivations of the contract. There's 11 contracts in total, if you include the term maintenance contract. And again, our policy behind those documents are reinforced by the Capital Works Management Framework. The agenda for this presentation is the GCC position paper, which is the Government Construction Contracts Committee. They published a paper in relation to BIM. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about public BIM, developing standards, procurement, and then the implementation strategy. All focused around the Digital Roadmap 2021. Government Construction Contracts Committee, in 2014, the government reviewed the public works contracts that were introduced in 2007. Some of the key findings in those documents, or in that report, was poor definition of works requirements, insufficient identification of risk, inappropriate risk allocation. They also recognised in that report that BIM was recognised by the Government Construction Contracts Committee as a powerful risk management tool. And in light of a lot of projects that have been developed and delivered through BIM, we have had problems with information and how information is being shared, particularly between design teams prior to going to site. And then we're ending up with issues on site because that collaboration wasn't as good as it should have been. The Government Construction Contracts Committee, it's basically comprised of more senior people within various departments like education, defence. These will be senior people at professional level, and they're there to give advice on projects that don't fit the norm or fit the standard model for public procurement. They're also there to advise various bodies in relation to how to do their procurement more effectively. The structure and membership, core members of GCC comprise the representative departments with significant involvement in construction-related activities. Primary outputs is, the number one was to review the public works contract after they had been introduced in 2007, and they're an approval body for public projects that don't fit the mould for public works contracts. So if there's an alternative contract going to be used, the body that's promoting that contract need to go to the GCC and they need to make a presentation to them to explain why they don't want to use the public works contracts. And invariably, it's probably for more or less the very large contracts or very complicated contracts. In the GCC position paper was published on 15th March 2017, a statement of intent. These are objectives that were promoted by government policy. Cost certainty, tender award stage, better value for money, more efficient delivery of public works projects. And again, all these items listed here are key deliverables if you're going to utilise BIM. We would see BIM as being a way of being able to deliver these very effectively. The Construction 2020 refers to two actions, Action 68, 69, and then we have the Action Plan for Jobs 2017, Action 162. And again, all of these are related to utilising BIM for public procurement. Now, the public sector BIM adoption strategy, government mandate. The government has decided to mandate BIM on a phased basis. Now, the first part of that phase is going to happen in Q2 of this year, and it'll be on the very large construction projects or very complicated construction projects. The intention is that the OGP will issue a paper to the Government Construction Contracts Committee at the end of Q2 this year. That will go to them for approval on how those projects are going to be described and defined. And effectively, from that date on, all new projects taken from that date that meet the criteria of that proposal, BIM will be a requirement for public works contracts. We will be sort of reinforcing to all of the contracting authorities out there that, you know, it's not soon enough to get involved on your BIM journey. You know, you should be preparing for it now. Waiting till the gate is opened is probably going to be too late. You're going to be catching up the whole time. The intention of the adoption strategy will be that there will be an intervening period from, say, from the second quarter of this year for possibly 12 months, where you can actually use that BIM journey as a method to train your staff, to upscale your staff. And it's good to hear from earlier on what Barry was saying about CitA being able to offer modules for people to be able to train themselves on specific aspects. Because BIM affects the entire professional team, and every element of that team has a different role to play in BIM, but you need to understand what those roles are to make collaboration much more effective. And we're looking at the possibility of the introduction for the first 12 months to affect the design teams mainly, and with the intention of that will be that 12 months will help you develop the skill sets to be able to implement it through the actual delivery phase of the construction projects. And secondly then is to impose standards for delivery across the public sector. We obviously want a consistent approach from every department, regardless whether they're delivering houses or whether they're doing jobs in Leinster House or whether it's going to be a road realignment down in Kerry or wherever. We want the same approach taken by everybody. And the new European standards in development are the ISO 19650 series. And again, the promotion of those documents in relation to the policy is what we will be reinforcing. To talk a little bit about public BIM. Public BIM essentially is a group of civil servants from across the country who got together, who have a keen interest in using BIM to deliver projects. The skill sets in it vary from novice to some people in there will be very experienced. The whole idea is that we share ideas together and we put together proposals that we can give to the Government Construction Contracts Committee to help public sector deliver a better service utilising BIM. It operates under the auspices of a dedicated Government Construction Contracts Subcommittee, both which are chaired by the OGP. David O'Brien chairs the GCCC committee itself, and I chair the BIM subgroup. The reason I ended up chairing the BIM subgroup is because they felt I was the one that had more knowledge of how BIM was going. There are some people on the Construction Contracts Committee who are not very BIM knowledgeable, and what they have done is they've nominated a representative from relative organisations to sit on the GCC BIM subgroup. And we've had our first meeting, and it was very positive. There was a lot of stuff brought to the table about how we're going to develop our own internal infrastructure around developing a BIM strategy and moving forward with how that can be transitioned into a delivery phase. As I said, it represents the views of public sector practitioners on the implementation of BIM. It's a sounding board and a network group. It provides a platform for guest speakers on industry-related topics. Where we feel we need somebody to come in and talk to us about a particular thing, be it about protocols or be it about how BIM is actually going to be delivered, whether it's standards or whether it's on how information is actually going to be collated, distributed, and those sort of topics. We meet probably 7 to 8 times a year, or when necessary. The production of a BIM protocol is something that we're working on at the moment. I see this as a key driver in relation to how BIM is going to be done in Ireland. I certainly believe that we need to have a protocol unique to Ireland. I have looked into some of the protocols that are in use at the moment, and there seems to be issues around intellectual property rights. So we want to get rid of all of those sort of mystifying things and be able to say quite confidently that if you're going to do a job in Ireland or deliver a construction project in Ireland, that this is the appropriate protocol to be using. And again, it goes back to the consistency. We would like everybody to have the same thing. We have done a review of the new CIC protocol, second edition. There was some interesting things came up about that. The main focus on it was the intellectual property rights of the content that was produced in the design phase. And again, we're trying to iron out issues in relation to that, in relation to how we share information going forward in the Irish sector. On top of that then as well, we've contacted the Construction Industry Council who were responsible for producing the protocol, and they lead us to believe that there may be issues with the intellectual property rights of that document being used in Ireland. And that's kind of led us to the point where we think we need our own one without any baggage that it may come with. The ethos of our group will be to standardise the approach to BIM and implement across the public sector for works contracts, develop procedures for the implementation of BIM, develop documentation suite for the implementation of BIM based on best international practice, prepare proposals for the GCCC for government approval. That's where we need to get government approval in order to implement BIM in Ireland. So they have made a commitment already with the position paper that they have produced, but for that position paper to transfer into actual projects, it means that government must approve how we're going to do it. And that's going to happen, as I said, at the end of Q2 this year. It can collaborate with industry stakeholders to develop the best practice. We have in the OGP at the moment, we've undertaken an engagement with all of the professional bodies in relation to the pricing structure and the requirements that are needed, the job specification for architects, engineers, quantity surveyors. We're actually trying to get to the nuts and bolts of is what is being priced and what are you pricing for. So the structure needs to be aligned with the BIM process stages. So if you're asked to produce a feasibility study at stage 1, that when that feasibility study is done and stage 1 is approved, that you should be paid for at the approval stage, not having to wait till stage 3 or 4. So there is a fairly extensive review going on of how payments are going to be structured, particularly for the design team, which means that nobody's getting left out in the cold or having to wait 6 months to get paid for something that they've done, and it's nearly water under the bridge by the time payment does actually come around. The European Union have produced standards, and they're all based around the EU BIM task group. They've produced a handbook for the introduction of building information model by the European public sector. And again, we are governed by European public procurement. And all our procurement strategies at the moment are aligned with these. And again, although the introduction of BIM is to help us deliver a better project, we still have to be able to say that we're aligning with our European colleagues. The handbook is aimed at public policy users, national public clients, and the operators. So in order for the OGP to be able to deliver a mandate, we need to make sure that these boxes are ticked. If not, we won't get funding from Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. One goes hand in hand with the other. Now, the NSAI are the body that has been recognised in Ireland as the official standards body. And again, they have a mirror group at the moment who are reviewing the ISO 19650 series of documents, and they have a whole body of work in relation to how that BIM is going to be transferred, particularly directly into the Irish market. They've also set up a body which is the mirror group, and in that mirror group they're looking at specifically the 19650 series and the fallouts of EIR's BIM execution plans. So there's a whole body of work that's going on in the background there in relation to those. They're also going to be the body that's going to be responsible for BIM certification. And at the moment, they're training their own staff to help do that. We are engaging with them from a public BIM side of things to how that certification is going to be done, how it's going to be delivered, and again, later on this year, we'll know more about that when they start to roll out their BIM certification processes. The current suite of standards, they're extensive and they're grown, but as I said, it's the 19650 series of documents that are going to be the mainstay for public procurement projects. So these are the documents, as Paul said earlier on, they're the ones that you're going to have to know and go by. They'll be your fallback in relation to how you develop your policies and strategies around how you do BIM. Procurement, and this is the big question in Ireland. From my background and experience, I've a very extensive background in project delivery. I've delivered everything from a €3,000–4,000 contract as an emergency fix on something up to 10, 12, 13 million euro schools, mainly in the Department of Education. The two codes, or the two pieces of legislation that come into play for public procurement is the Public Spending Code and the Capital Works Management Framework. Public Spending Code applies to all government procurements, from services, goods, utilities, you name it. It's all covered under the Public Spending Code. The Capital Works Management Framework specifically deals with construction. And I've tried to lay out here just that the new Public Spending Code, the way they have it broken down now, it's A, B, C, D, and E. They're the logical progression as to how you are supposed to manage a project from an administrative perspective when it comes to procurement. And the Capital Works Management Framework has an overlap, but the two stages that we're missing is stage 0, which lines up with stage A in the general provisions, and the stage 6, which is the in-use and maintenance. We don't do those at the moment. So there's going to be changes to Capital Works Management Framework, and we've recognised that we do need to look at what happens before the project actually kicks off and what happens when the project is handed over. Because traditionally, I know in the schools environment, we would have handed the school over to the Board of Management and said, there you go, there's your maintenance money for the year, sort it out yourself. That traditionally was the way we did stuff. But now we realise that with life cycle costings on buildings and everything else, we need to be looking at this at the design phase. So we also need to know that when we hand something over to another body to manage and run, that they're aware of the maintenance costs, the contracts that need to be in place to keep the building operating as efficiently as it was intended when it was designed. And again, the Capital Works Management Framework is based on 4 pillars. There's public works contracts, standard to conditions of engagement. And as I said earlier on, we're looking at those conditions of engagement for consultants and how the whole structure of that is going to be broken down. And again, I think that will deliver very effectively into how the appointments are made in BIM and what your responsibilities are through your responsibility matrix. That the responsibility matrix will be linked back to your conditions of engagement. Again then, it's cost plan and control, suitability assessment, guidance notes, and just a glossary for how things are done. I've tried to map here on just using a piece of mind mapping software as to where the public spending code fits in with the Capital Works Management Framework for procurement. And I've added in my stage 0 and 6 on the CWMF procurement phases. These are all the gates that you've got to go through for a public procurement. Potentially 3 engagements with e-tenders, depending on the client and how that interaction is. If a client doesn't have any professional staff working within the organisation that's making the procurement, they may have to go and get a consultant to come up with a procurement strategy for them. And again, that's not a design service, it's an administrative service, but yet you need professionals within that procurement. So to try and line these all up and come up with gates for approval stages is something that we're very keen to develop, and I think it will give more clarity on how projects are divided into the various phases. But also, it's a useful tool for risk management, that the risk management is actually looked at each gate, which prevents a project going out of control. But again, it all comes back to the very, very start. which is the information that the client actually requires. The client not having the knowledge of that information is a recipe for disaster, through change orders and design changes and all that type of stuff that you don't need on a project. It'd be great to be able to give clarity from the start and let people work to what's on paper, what they're supposed to be doing. The CWMF, again, it's cost certainty, better value for money, and more efficient. All these things tick the boxes for BIM, and we'd be quite keen to use BIM on public procurement projects. The implementation strategy, this is taken from the GCCC position paper, and again, they have the public sector, the Band 5 projects, which invariably are very large projects or very complicated projects. Q2 of this year. Now they have some departments down here that have been kind of named in the structure, but I would be of the opinion that this will apply to all public works contracts, irrespective of what department you're in. We don't want to have one set of rules for one and another for another. So if it's going to kick off in Q2, and when it does kick off in Q2, we should say that these will be the timelines that we're looking at. You know, your 12 months plus is going to be your incubation period for how you get your organisation ready for when it becomes full-on BIM. And that's going to give you an opportunity to start training up your staff. If you haven't done so already, and as I said earlier on, you should be now at this stage encouraging training with your staff and familiarising them with the processes that are involved in delivering BIM projects. Again, this is a description of what the project bands mean. These will probably change a little bit, but and the reason why I say to change a little bit is we need them to be a little bit more definitive, so that there's not an out clause for anybody when it comes to a project that should be delivered through BIM. Band 5, complex projects with specialist operation and maintenance regime. So acute hospitals, laboratories, special civil engineering structures, light rail, they will have specialised operation requirements or planned maintenance. The implementation strategy, what the construction sector needs to do. One of the things we see quite regular on most public procurement projects is there is no procurement strategy, or the procurement strategy is very, very loose. Probably left to the QS in most stages. How are we going to do this procurement? Not really appropriate. The procurement strategy needs to encompass BIM. You can't decide to bring BIM into the procurement after the project has been approved. It's too late at that stage. It needs to be approved very early on. And again, the definition of the BIM requirements need to be delivered by the contracting authorities that we deal with, or the clients. Risk needs to be managed. Define the digital plan of works, define the classification system, systemize the efficiencies, develop new professional skills, training resources, and centralise open resources. These are all things that we have planned over the next 12 to 18 months to develop in conjunction with public sector partners. And the participation of the professional bodies, again, it's great to see the RAI taking the lead and producing some superb BIM documents. They have done for the last 8-9 years, been developing those suite of documents, and some very credible stuff. Again, very focused around the architectural profession, obviously coming from the RAI. I think the IEI and I think the SCSI also need to start to engage with everybody, so we can develop a suite of documents that covers everybody. It's not going to leave anybody out in the cold. The last thing we want is litigation. We would prefer to get the definition of contracts done before we go out, then that always helps reduce the risk of litigation. So that's effectively all I have to say at the moment on procurement. As I said, the key dates are Q2 of this year is when the first BIM is going to become mandatory on those large projects, and that's where we stand at the moment. It is a collaborative process. All of the professional bodies need to be involved, and it's great to see so many people here from all the different organisations around the country today. But you know, it's only through your hard work that we're actually going to develop a system that we can all use. And I think that's the main thing to take out of today is that, you know, if we don't engage, nothing will happen. You know, we'll be in the same position in 6 months' time dealing with the same litigious contractors and projects that have gone awry because definitions weren't given early enough. But I think if we can get a suite of documents together that people can use and confidently use, I think it will help develop a far more secure public service delivery. That's it. Thank you very much.